Hello and welcome to episode number 45 of the Maximizing E-commerce podcast. My name is Kevin, your host, and today we're going to be talking about what to do when things go wrong or you don't get the outcome you're looking for. So, just to tell you a little bit about why I'm recording this, it's first off for the viewers and listeners of this podcast. Just so that you have something to refer back to, hopefully it helps you. But then at the same time, too, to be completely honest, or selfish reasons I'm doing this. I'm doing this for myself because right now I think everything's going great. But being an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you can relate to this, things don't always go the way we hope. They don't always go the way we plan. And so sometimes having something to go back and refer to of a game plan to get out of, whether it's a funk or just things aren't going quite right or maybe not as expected, whatever the case is, and having a plan of how you can get out of that. And sometimes having that ahead of time can be beneficial. So if you are going through something as you're listening to this, hopefully this is very helpful to you, regardless of whether you are going through something now or you think, oh, this might help me in the future. It would be a huge favor to me. I'm going to ask two things. One, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment down below with what you do whenever things aren't going quite right. Do you agree with what I have going on here, or would you do something a little differently? If you are listening to the podcast and you're finding this helpful, if you could go and leave an honest rating review on iTunes or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. So, all right. So I'm going to stop with the asking for reviews and subscriptions and all that fun stuff. And let's just go ahead and get into the actual meat of the content here. So first off, one of the things, and again, I'm saying this to myself in the future. So hopefully future self will appreciate what I'm saying here. So don't beat yourself up. So it can be easy to get kind of stuck in this, things didn't go right. It's because I'm a bad person or I'm just not cut out for this or whatever the case is. We can sometimes do that to ourselves. Oftentimes we really are our own worst critic. And I think sometimes it helps to put things in perspective because oftentimes we overestimate how bad things really are. And, usually it's something that we can work through, but we don't always give ourselves credit in the moment. Sometimes even when we know we can work through it, still we're kind of holding on to this negative emotion. So, at the end of the day, you can't control necessarily the outcome of every situation. You can only control how you respond to it or, control what you do going into the situation, but you can't necessarily control the outcome, but you can control how you respond to it. And sometimes how you respond to things really is what defines you. Then, ask yourself this question. If things just aren't right or things are wrong or just going poorly or whatever the case is, ask yourself, did things really go wrong or poorly? Or is it just my expectations were off? And a lot of times it's really just because our expectations were off. So if, you launched a product and it didn't do as well as you hoped, well, is it because you're comparing it maybe to other products that you sold, or you were looking at the market and saying, oh, I could definitely do that. So maybe you just need to give it more time. Maybe there's more strategies you need to put into play. So, it's one of those things we got to avoid comparison, because just because somebody on social media said, here's the version of my life and what I'm doing, and yours isn't quite matching up. Well, you don't necessarily know what's going on behind the scenes, because generally on social media, people show the good stuff. They don't necessarily always show what's going on behind the scenes or what's going on in their head. That head trash that you might have at times, chances are other people have it too. So it's one of those things that it never helps to compare. It can be helpful to look for how other people maybe led to things that did well for them or successes they had, and see, okay, what can I apply, but not to compare and say, oh, well, but they did this and I can't, so therefore I'm da 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 da. That's never helpful. Then the next thing is, in the situation, what can you learn from? So really kind of diagnose what happened. And oftentimes when we're diagnosing what happens, it's helpful, I find, to take myself out of the situation. So oftentimes it can be easy to get so emotionally connected to the situation that it's that saying, you can't see the forest through the trees. That sometimes you just ask someone else for a little bit of help diagnosing the situation. Someone you trust, maybe someone that understands the situation. So like in e-commerce, someone else that maybe is selling on Amazon or selling on their own website, or someone that at least has some framework of reference, because maybe they've been through similar situations. And oftentimes we think our situations, especially in the moment, are so unique, which oftentimes they are, but oftentimes like the overlap of unique and actually what everyone else has gone through before is more overlapping with what everyone else has gone through before. So more people can offer help and solutions than oftentimes we realize in the moment. And try to imagine yourself, and I'm borrowing this from Tony Robbins. So try to imagine yourself, that whatever your problem is, it's not a problem that is like above you, that you're looking up at, almost like a weight on your shoulders. Can you picture what I'm talking about here? That's almost like you're looking down at the problem. So instead, if you imagine yourself looking down at the problem, it's almost like all of a sudden like your posture changes and like it just feels different. It's just a different feeling of addressing whatever that situation is, because you're looking down at the problem. It's like, it's down there, no big deal, I can step on it, I can handle that, no biggie. And so that's a really good way, I think, to look at your situations again, is like you're looking down on it, not that you're looking up on it and it's like crashing in on you. You just feel, as I'm describing it, I can almost feel the weight of this imaginary problem that I'm hypothetically talking about here. And then try not to spend, as you're learning about the situation and going back and kind of diagnosing what happened, try not to spend too much time justifying, because at the end of the day, whatever happened might not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. And I'm totally guilty of this, where sometimes I look back in a situation and I keep wanting to justify why it is. And I tell people, oh, this happened because of such and such, whether it's an excuse or it is a legitimate justification, something that is true. And if X didn't happen, my Y result would have been better. Probably, maybe, I don't know. But it's one of those things that I'm holding on to the negative of the situation by doing that and not focusing on the future. So we're going to get more into like the focusing on the future here in a little bit. But then the next step I think that's important is to realize that time cures most wounds, and that, just about any issue, if you think of it as this too shall pass. And that's ancient wisdom. I think it was the ancient Persians that said that or something like that. But it's one of those situations where this too shall pass. And a situation that I was thinking about recently, this is not my own situation. This is one I was watching a interview on a YouTube channel called Valuetainment. A gentleman named Patrick Bet David runs an insurance agency. He brings on a lot of interesting people. If you haven't checked out his YouTube channel, I recommend checking it out. But he had on Fab Morvan, basically a gentleman from Milli Vanilli. And if you're not familiar with Milli Vanilli, Girl, You Know It's True, Blame It on the Rain, Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You, songs that were popular basically like when I was in junior high. I'm kind of dating myself here, but basically late 80s, early 90s. They had these songs that were really popular. They got the Grammy for, best act. And then all of a sudden, one of them was at, or not one of them, it was a duo, and they were out at some concert, and whether it was a CD or a tape or whatever, the song skipped. And so, Girl, You Know, It's Girl, You Know, It's Girl, You Know, like it just kept repeating over and over again. And the one freaked out and there was supposedly singing it, but they were really lip syncing it, and ran off the stage. So it turns out the whole act was somewhat of a fraud. Fraud's probably the wrong word, but it was one of those situations where they had kind of gotten themselves locked into a contract, and they were really more performers in an act, or really more actors, I should say, than singers. Now, the Fab, was on the video, I was watching some other videos where he sings. Like, the guy actually is a pretty good singer. Um, so it's one of those things like, he was in a situation where all of a sudden now they got quote unquote found out. Now, some people might say, oh, well, they put themselves in that situation. There was a little bit of, I could feel for the guy, because, imagine if you were in your early 20s or whatever, and people are giving you fame and fortune, and they're just like, oh yeah, just play along with it, it'll be fine. No, but we want to sing. No, just do what we say, just lip sync. You're trusting these people. You signed a contract. Not that it would have been impossible to get out of, but it would have been very hard, as I understood it. And so basically, like, they were the laughing stock. So if you can remember back to this, like, I remember being on the news, like, because they were hugely popular, and they had like um CDs and cassettes, and maybe even records were still around at the time. But people had like their music. There was no digital music. There's no MP3s back then. There was no YouTube. There's no Napster or whatever. It was like people were taking their music and like making bonfires, and they were burning it. Their fans were like turning against them, and it was like, and they were really kind of left. It was kind of a not a great situation where, looking back on it, they were kind of left to the wolves, so to speak, in the public eye. Um, and I can only imagine what it must have been, what it would have been like in these days with social media. But I mean, they were really, and because there was no social media, so it was like wherever the public focus was is where the public focus was. So our focus is kind of all over the place nowadays. So it was kind of like, at the time, if this was the public focus, that's where everyone's looking, and they were kind of like, everyone's looking at them. And point of the story is, sad part is, one of them, Rob Pilatus, I believe was his name, the other person in the duo, ended up killing himself in the late 90s. And so Fab, the one that's still around, um, you know, he's turned around his life. It was a difficult situation, but it led to a lot of opportunities. If you look him up on YouTube, you'll find, him. There's one video I found, like, the guy who actually sang the song and him on stage together. Um, so the person who was the behind the scenes actual singer, but not the person you see in the videos, but the person whose voice you hear when you hear the songs. They were singing together, and like all these other stuff. And he's gotten to be a producer and all these other things. And he's gotten a lot of great projects he's gotten to be in. And, I think a lot of people are very intrigued by his story nowadays because of what he went through. And I think, really, if you think about it, we tend to love a turnaround story. And so wherever you are, if you're the lowest of lows, do you feel like, challenge yourself that it's going to be a turnaround story. This too shall pass. And one of the things I think you can do that is helpful, and this is a little more actionable now, is you can write out things in your life that maybe seemed like a big deal at the time, but you look back on and you laugh. Whether it's something that was fairly, or maybe you don't look back and laugh. It doesn't have the same level of weight it felt like in the moment. And to use a fairly juvenile thing, you can probably relate to this. Like, I remember being in junior high, maybe listening to Milli Vanilli on the way to school, and having, like, a pimple on my nose and thinking like it was the end of the world. Now that's, a 13-year-old's way of looking at things at times. But at the same time too, like, think about, even in your adult life, you probably have had some situations where you look back at and you say, okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was in the moment. And so sometimes writing out these situations where you look back and like, okay, I've overcome this. And I think, to take it even a step further, what you could do is things that maybe seemed really difficult, or even goals that seemed impossible, and you had some setbacks along the way, write out what were they, and now what you ended up achieving. And I think there's a lot of power when you look back at it. This is probably another exercise I'm borrowing from Tony Robbins, where you can write out, what was it you did? So, like, what was your plan? What was your vision? What were the steps you got to get there? And what you tend to find in those common scenarios was, yes, you were disappointed. You didn't focus on the disappointment. You probably gave yourself some sort of plan. There's most likely, for the things you did the best at, it was probably some sort of deadline, whether they're self-imposed or it was just a requirement based on the situation. So I tend to find I work best under pressure of deadlines. Maybe you do as well. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't need deadlines. But for a lot of us, I think we really need some level of our backs against the wall because of some sort of deadline. And so think of those type of things. And so whatever those common threads are, kind of like what I just mentioned, maybe yours are a little different. How do you incorporate that into what you're doing as you start looking into the future. So now we kind of talked a little bit about like how to rectify the present or the past, but eventually you have to turn and focus more on the future. So let's now start focusing on the future. So in this moment you're in, ask yourself, what do I need to do? Like, what are those things you need to start focusing on doing? Because you can't just focus on the past. You got to start thinking, okay, what is the future? So if you've ever read the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, he talks about the difference between urgent and important. Important are the things that, like, for example, if you're a farmer, it's pretty important that you plant seeds. It's not necessarily urgent. You know, if you have seeds planted and all of a sudden, you know, you've got a bunch of um, bugs coming in and eating all your plants and it could ruin your crop, that could be pretty urgent that you need to do something about it right away. So start looking at what are those things you need to do. So sometimes it's getting the urgent stuff off of your plate. So like what is that kind of like triage? You know, the how do you stop the bleeding if there's bleeding in a situation? Is it something like you need to call a supplier and renegotiate something? You know, if let's say this is a situation that's actually happened to me where stuff has been mislabeled and Amazon sending the wrong things, and it's not their fault. It's my fault. Well, it's not, maybe it wasn't my fault. It's whoever labeled it. But as a business owner, it's my problem. So I got to fix it. You know, so maybe it's contacting customers and making it right with them. And maybe I'm not going to make it right with everyone, but I'm going to do my best to do that. Or if, you know, it's all of a sudden, you launched a product and it's not going as well as you'd hoped, you know, what can you do to drive sales? I guarantee you, even if you tell yourself, because I've been guilty of this, where you say, oh, I've done everything, chances are you haven't. If you've done everything, then you're not going to be in the situation you have been in. And sometimes doing everything could be just liquidate the whole thing and move on. But it's one of those things that we can constantly um, keep trying new things. Because keep this in mind that we overestimate, as we're now starting to look into the future, we overestimate the value of the situation we're in. No, that it's not valuable. I shouldn't say it that way, because everything we do, you know, is carrying over into the future. But there's another day tomorrow. And this was something I saw in a video with Gary Vaynerchuk the other day, and this one really struck me. And I loved how he phrased it. It was somebody who was just like looking to launch a podcast, and the guy was talking about, you know, like, I got one shot, and Gary's like, well, that's nonsense. You may feel like you have one shot because you want things to really work out um, in the beginning, but you want to keep moving ahead. And so, like, you know, with this podcast, like, it grows over time. You know, if I had just said, you know, when I first turned it on, it was kind of a little bit of crickets. Now, some of you may be listening saying, Kevin, I've been a loyal listener since the very beginning. Well, I thank you for that. But it's grown over time. There's gotten to be more people that listen to this podcast. And the goal is it keeps growing as I keep putting out more content. And whatever that is with you, it's the same thing of kind of what Gary was explaining in this. I just used the podcast, my podcast, because that's what he was talking about there. But it's like in anything in life, you know, if you're a parent, you wouldn't say to your kid, well, this walking thing is not working for you. So we're just going to have to stop this and just find something else to do. No, you can keep trying. In most situations, you can keep trying. Even if it feels like it didn't work out, you can keep trying. You know, Hall of Famers in baseball, they get on base, what, 30% of the time? You know, some people might say, well, it's not on base. It's, you know, batting average is a little different than on base. You know what I mean? Oftentimes, some of the best people are the ones that strike out the most. The best, most successful players in baseball are the ones that strike out the most. And that analogy works with so many things. If you don't try, if you don't get the at bat, you are doomed to fail. You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, as they say. So start looking at what is it that I can do as I'm moving forward. So now that you've potentially figured out what it is you need to do, you know, at least maybe at this point now you're thinking about like what you need to do in the moment. So now start thinking about, like, you know, future pacing. So now, it's kind of like, what do I need to do to get myself out of the situation in the moment, the urgent stuff? So now we're start focusing more on the important stuff. And I think this is now where it gets important to talk about vision. So with vision, you may have heard it said, it's in the Bible, where there is no vision, the people perish. And that's really important because you have to have some sort of vision on where you're going. And I don't mean this in like some like esoteric secret, if you just, dream it, the law of attraction is going to bring it to you. But I'm going to give you a little exercise, another one I borrowed from Tony Robbins. So if you're listening, which would be awesome, thank you for your wisdom that I'm able to impart here. So if you're driving, maybe time stamp this and come back to it. And I will even make a note to timestamp this exercise. Writing that down for myself right now. So in the show notes, if you go to maximizingecommerce.com/45, or if you look down below in the notes, if you're watching this on YouTube, I will timestamp this exercise. You can come back to it because it's one of those things. The first time I did it, I was kind of amazed. So stand up. Again, don't do this in your car, or if you are in your car and you think this is urgent to do, pull over someplace safe, not on the side of the road, and get out and hurt yourself. So please make sure you're someplace safe. Stand up straight with your feet about shoulder width apart. Point your finger straight ahead. So right now is pointing right at the camera. So just point your finger straight ahead. Now, close your eyes and imagine, or don't even worry about imagining. We'll do that here in a second. Just put your arm back as far as you can before it starts maybe to hurt, or you're just like, I can't go any farther than that. So just stretch back as far as you can. Now open your eyes and look and see how far did you go. So now put your finger out in front of you again. Close your eyes. Now keep your finger and your arm stretched out. So your arm's still stretched out, pointed out in front of you. And imagine, don't actually move it, just imagine this. Imagine now that you went twice as far as you just did. So it's probably like now pointing to the other side of your body. Now imagine you are so loose and stretchy, and you're able to get your hand all the way around to the front. Now imagine it's almost like your arm is like rubber. And imagine it just wrapping around yourself like 3 more times. Wrap your arm around yourself. Now, with your eyes still closed and your finger still out in front of you, now do the same exercise we did before. Point your arm back as far as you can possibly go. Now open your eyes. Chances are you went back farther than you did the first time because you pictured it. It's the power of vision. And I was kind of blown away the first time I did that exercise. I was like, really? It was like pretty significant. And some of it was maybe I didn't challenge myself as much the first time. Some of it was I was really seeing what was possible, even though it was like not possible to do. Kind of like, you wrap it all the way around your body, like it's made of rubber. But it kind of gave a little bit of insight into, okay, I can go farther than I did, farther than I was giving myself credit for. And I think that's the value of that exercise. All right. So now that was really more about vision. So now what is your vision? And write it down, because at times you're going to have to come back and look at your vision and say, okay, what is my vision? What is my vision here? Now, what you want to do is decide, what is your why? Why? Okay, now you have a vision of where you're going. So now we're more future imagining things. So what is your vision of where you want to go, and why is it important? What's something that's going to be compelling, that's going to pull you towards that vision? So write that down, because I think it was Nietzsche, or Nietzsche, however you pronounce his name, the 19th century, I think 19th century German philosopher. I think it was a German philosopher. Anyway, with a why strong enough, you can endure anyhow. I believe that's what he had said. So if your why is strong enough, you can endure just about anything. So that's something you can relate back to when times maybe aren't going well. So now if you're repeating these steps of what I was saying before, that might be one of your first things you do before you start telling yourself you're not going to beat yourself up. You start reminding yourself of your why and your vision. And then realize that at the end of the day, you are in control of your future. And ask yourself, whatever you're doing next, is future you going to thank you for it, or is it going to regret it? And chances are future you is going to regret the chances you didn't take. So if you got so, for lack of a better phrase, gun shy about taking the next step and you don't try, you will probably regret it in the future. Oh, but if I had only da 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 da. That's the way I look at it a lot of times when I'm like maybe like down about something. Like, well, I got to get back up and I got to get back on, at home plate to try to hit the ball. So you got to keep pushing yourself forward. So what will future you think of you? Will future you thank you for the chance you took, or will future you be upset because of the chance you didn't take? And chances are, even if things didn't go well, in another situation, you can keep taking more at bats, keep learning, keep whittling down to what works and what doesn't, so you can focus more on what does work. And then again, it's just keep pushing ahead and being committed. So making sure you are in for what it is you're trying to do. And this is I'll borrow another thing from Patrick David from Valuetainment. It was a video I watched, he recently put out, where he was talking about, he was like, I guess, if you imagine American Ninja Warrior, the TV show, it's basically like this show where, people are doing all these um, obstacles basically. And one of the obstacles is, there's like a 10-foot wall you can jump up, grab hold of and pull yourself up. And another one, there's a 12-foot wall. Another one, there's a 14-foot wall. It's like kind of like it's not like a 90-degree angle. It's like kind of a little bit arced. So, but it's pretty steep, where people like kind of run and jump and get up. And so he said he got like to the 10, he's a pretty athletic guy. And then he said, ran and jumped and got 12-foot one. And then he ran and jumped and the 14-foot almost got it. 14-foot almost got it. It kept falling. And then I guess the instructor walked up to him and said, you know what? The reason you're not making it is because you're not committed. He's like, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, I can tell because let's say his left hand was extended to grab the wall, but maybe his right hand wasn't quite extended, almost like he was bracing himself for the fall. So it was almost like he was believing he was going to fall and didn't believe he was going to get to the top of this wall. And so once he committed and having both arms fully extended, that, there's no guarding himself for the fall, that's when he made it up. And he said he tried it a couple of different times, so it wasn't just a fluke, and he kept getting it because he was committed to getting to the top. Maybe it's not jumping to on top of a 14-foot wall, but whatever your proverbial 14-foot wall is, stay committed, keep going. Because the key is just to keep moving ahead, keep reevaluating, figure out what works, do more of what works and do less of what doesn't. So whenever things don't go the way you wanted them to, you just got a blessing of something that didn't work, that now you know what not to do, that you can tweak, and that you can relate more to what does work and maybe try something a little bit different. Just keep trying that over and over again. So hopefully you found this to be helpful. If you did, again, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could like and subscribe and let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are. And then if you're listening to this in the podcast, I really hope you found this to be helpful. And feel free to email me, kevin@maximizingecommerce.com, and tell me, I will promise you, I will respond. What were your thoughts from this conversation here? So is this something that future you will thank you for listening to? So thank you so much for checking this out. And I'm going to wish you the best in your e-commerce journey. Take care.